What is going on? It is Wednesday night. I apologize for the couple-day delay. I had some things come up, so I haven't really been able to do a stream. Tonight, I am thrilled to be joined by Karan. Karan does draft writing for the transfer portal. He is one of the brightest minds when it comes to prospects, one of the voices I respect the most when it comes to breaking down players, their college tape, and everything that comes with that. So I'm thrilled to have Karan with me tonight. What's going on, dude? How you doing?
Appreciate the praise, man. No, yeah, I'm just love to talk ball. Most of you guys know me for my Niners stuff, but I'm trying to kind of branch out to NFL draft and whatnot. So I feel like it's a good time to get into that, especially with all the combine stuff over pro day. Now we have a bit more clarity. So yeah.
Absolutely. So what I'm thinking we're going to do is we're going to do a 7-round mock draft. The 49ers have 9 picks. We're going to go through initially. We'll just pick where they kind of have picks. We'll let Karan tell you guys a little bit about why he likes certain players, why he thinks it might be a good fit for the 49ers. And then maybe if we have time, we can go through a couple scenarios of like trading up, moving back, and stuff like that. So I'll go ahead and get it started real quick. Jamal saying, what's up? What's going on, Jamal? I see Jesus in there. What's going on? No tacos. We'll get this started. And let me go ahead and start this. Also, too, if you're doing mock drafts, just throwing this out there, I don't work for PFF. I get nothing for saying this. This is just my own preference. Their mock draft tool is much better than other outlets that I've seen. It's much more in line with how I've seen past drafts actually pan out. Nothing's going to be perfect, but I will say if you're going to do mock drafts and toy around, use the PFF one because it's going to be much more likely to be realistic and close to whatever ends up happening at the end of this month when the draft actually happens. All due respect, I've seen the Pro Football Network one. There's guys who are going to be gone in the first 35 picks that are getting picked at like 150 on that tool. So, yeah, it looks good when you have this mock draft full of superstars you're drafting in the 4th round. But if you want it to be like really accurate, I just recommend using the PFF tool. Just throwing that out there for anyone who wants to toy around with them.
Yeah, same for me. I would just say we were just talking about that. PFF's really on top of that. You can say what you want about their grades and whatnot, but their mock draft simulator is a great tool when it comes to all this.
Yeah, they do a really good job, and it's updated. It changes. They take into account where people are mocking players, where certain players are going. So it's actually changed just in the last like month or so of me toying around and doing these. Jesus said Brad tried a different one, and it was not accurate. If it was PFN, man, like I said, I've seen people drafting Sky Moore at like pick 130, and that guy's like he's like a guaranteed top 40 pick. Like there's no chance I see him getting anywhere close to there. So all due respect to those outlets, if you wanted something more accurate, use PFF. What's going on, dude? Thank you for coming by. It's just I do these because I want it to be as close as possible. Like, yeah, it's really nice if you can throw out like a stud player at 61 and write an article about your mock draft with the 49ers getting that player. But to me, it's just kind of like, I'd rather it be as accurate as possible. I want to go through the motions as much as possible with it being accurate. So having said that, we are on the board here. This happens at least once a stream. My bad, dude. 1 second. My laptop always boots me for 1 second. Here we go. 1 sec. Let's see. Okay. So let me see. Yeah, my laptop for whatever reason, like mouse will click back on the StreamYard page. So
that's cool.
Is there anybody off the top of your head that you didn't see get taken off? My apologies for distracting. I can scroll through some of the available players.
Zoom in on this. I'm just trying to format the thing.
I can go through the players who were picked too real quick. So if there were any names you were looking for specifically kind of in that range that might be there. Jamal, I think that Sky Moore is going to be a first-round pick, to be honest. I think he's one of the best receivers in the draft. I'd be shocked. Like, where did he go here? He went 40 to Seattle. Yeah, that would not be good for 49ers fans if it actually goes that way, even if they don't have a quarterback yet.
That's kind of who's there. I wrote about Sky Moore recently. Like, he should be a first-round pick. If he isn't, then someone's good in the steal.
His release package is insane. He has big hands. He can line up inside. He can land up outside. Like, it's just the only issue I had with Sky Moore is that no receiver should ever wear the number 24. I thought it was hideous. I thought it was terrible. It was annoying to look at. But like on the field, he was fantastic. So is there anybody just for starters, is there anybody at 61 that you're looking at that's kind of been mocked in that range where you're like, man, like the 49ers, they have to sprint to the podium with the card if this guy's available?
I mean, I think there's a large, like, especially at edge, because I think that's where they're going to go. There's so many guys that could be there. I mean, Myjai Sanders is one guy. I'm not sure if he's on the board here. Another guy who I saw you bring up that I'm a huge fan of, Josh Pascal. I think if he's there, that's the pick for me. I think he's an everyone guy that's just going to be amazing. Oh my God.
My apologies. This is killing me. This every time it clicks out. My bad. Yeah. Josh Pascal, dude, I'm a big fan of his, and I think he is available. So this is what's wild to me is that like he's usually getting mocked. I'm seeing around like pick like 70 or so. Let me see. I think he should be like 72 or so on 71 on their board. Myjai Sanders is like 103 now, if I recall. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Hey, he's not even on the first page. He is 119 on the PFF big board now, which is wild to me. So if he were available, honestly, I know the 49ers already have a pretty deep defensive line group. If you could get Pascal and Sanders with one of those first 3 picks you have, I would do it in a heartbeat. Like if he was still there at 105, I would be sprinting to the podium as well. So we're going to go Pascal here. That's the pick.
I would go Pascal. Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to talk a little bit about him and why you like him before I click? Because I think it'll just keep rolling once I do.
For sure. I mean, I think Pascal, especially out of all these guys, I think you're looking at an every down guy. Like he's going to be on the field at edge as long as you need him to be. He's a great run defender. Pass rush it's good. It could obviously it's not like Myjai Sanders has so much speed off the line, but he's not going to give you that same value on early downs. But from what I've watched, I think Josh Pascal is better than what the Niners have at edge across from Nick Bosa right now. And I think if you throw him in that rotation, Bosa, you can have Armstead coming in, and then having Ebukam, and maybe they bring in another guy through free agency. I think, and Omenihu as well is also a part of that rotation. I think Pascal he could be a day 1 starter.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at too. My first mock draft, I did an episode on it. So for those of you guys who saw my first mock draft, he was the first pick I had. I wrote an article for Niners Nation about it, and a lot of people weren't really like thrilled with that pick. And I think this is the problem, is that when 49ers fans think edge opposite of Nick Bosa, they saw what D Ford could do, and they just expect that to be kind of like the prototypical mold. And I have 2 problems with that. Number one, I know he's not, he hasn't been playing as much lately, and he's had the injuries. I think people have forgotten how special D Ford is and how special of a talent he is. And D Fords don't just grow on trees. There's a reason the Niners had to give up a 2nd-round pick, extend him to that big contract. He's a very good player. It's very hard to find. If there were D Fords sitting around in every draft, teams would be drafting them, right? So that's kind of my first thing, is that as great as that like mold is, if you can find that player, that doesn't mean that player is going to be available in every draft or every free agency crop. The other thing is what you mentioned, is that being able to defend the run and being able to be out there on base downs when you don't know that a team's going to be throwing the football is extremely valuable. And I think people get so caught up in pass rushing that they tend to overlook how important it is to have an edge who can set the edge, who can win, who can fill run gaps, who can do all the things that are required of a traditional 3-down lineman. And I think personally, like, he has the physical abilities where if you give him some time, like, I'm not sitting here and saying he's going to be a 12, 14 sack guy every season, but I think he has the ability to get after the passer, and he definitely can improve in that regard. But immediately from day one, I would feel comfortable having him starting, at a pretty prominent role and eventually being that every down, edge opposite Bosa. And realistically, like, you have Samson Ebukam at an $8 million cap hit this year. If he doesn't play as well as he did last year, you're probably moving on. And if he plays better or stays the same, he's going to be due for a relatively lucrative extension. So at this point, if you get a guy like Pascal, you get 4 years of that production opposite Bosa on a cheap contract. And that does have to be kind of factored in. So I'm with you there. So let's go. We'll take Pascal off the board. And then I think the next pick is going to be 93. So it'll start going through. We'll see some other players coming off. I'm kind of toying with the idea here. Like, I think the Niners might need to trade up if there's a couple of guys that they like, that I like, up into that kind, mid 80s, low 80s range, which I don't think should cost too much. And they do have the ammunition to do so. For the sake of this, we'll just see how it shakes out the first time going down the board. But I don't want to. Okay, so there's one that just came off. Like Nick Cross is a guy I really like. I would move up those 5 picks to take Cross. For this one, unfortunately, he isn't there. So is there somebody else that you're looking at maybe in that range that didn't get taken? And I'll go through the last 10 picks or so you can see David Bell 189, Khalil Shakir 90, Max Mitchell 87, Dylan Parham 80. That's actually shaked out a lot. They must have been doing an update or something, because this is actually shaken out a lot differently than the few of the mocks I've done lately.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to that point you made about D Ford. I recall a conversation I had. I think it was Jamal. We were talking about David Ojabo. There's a good amount of similarities with him and D Ford. I wouldn't say they're the exact same, but if that's a guy who, especially with the knee injury, could definitely be, if the Niners want to move up, that's probably a guy they could go after. But back to 93, I think that's probably DB range, safety, nickel corner. We'll have to see what they do with the K'Waun Williams replacement, but I think you probably have to go corner there.
Okay, so here's the corners that are still on the board, and I'm with you there. I took a corner at 105 at my most recent one, so these are the corners that they have left on the board right here.
Yeah. Marcus Jones, I really enjoyed watching him. I think if you're going to go nickel, that's the guy. I think he's the best nickel in the class. Another guy I've watched is Cordell Flutt. I think he's kind of on the opposite spectrum of Jones, where he's not as technically sound, but in terms of his physicality and the way he moves, I was really impressed. I was trying to watch Derek Stingley for an article I was watching. He just kept popping. He was moving with these high-end receivers. He was making plays on the ball. His hips are very fluid. So I could definitely see that being a way they go as well, in terms of if they want to go with more upside over the day one starter.
Yeah, so I like Flott a lot, to be honest with you. I thought that he was the guy that really, because Jones had been off on a lot of these, that I was doing. He was gone by 80, 85, whatever. So in that range, Flott was the guy that stood out to me, because he has, he's 6'1", he has pretty good length. People make jokes because he looks pretty skinny. I think he's 170, 175 is what he weighed in at. But he held his own against SEC competition. People make it out to be it's this impossible jump going from college to the NFL if you're undersized. But there's plenty of players who play much bigger than their weight or much bigger than their size may indicate. And I think Flott was a guy who really did have that ability to play bigger than what his frame may suggest. So I'm totally with you there. So you're going to go Marcus Jones with this pick, though, right?
I would go Marcus Jones.
Okay.
But back to that size debate, I do think Flott, I believe he's 6 foot 175. If I recall correctly, I think that's fine for an NFL nickel. Marcus Jones is a lot smaller. He's 5'8", I'd like to say, and that's definitely room to have concern. I think he's a full-time nickel. Flott you could probably flex outside if needed, but if we're looking at strictly a replacement for K'Waun Williams, I think Marcus Jones is best suited to do that, and he's the best player available at that point.
I think that's a great pick, too, and he also contributes a little bit, or has the ability to contribute a little bit in the return game as well. He was a solid returner, contributor on special teams, so
yep.
I'm definitely with you on that. And then the Niners are picking again at 105, so it's not like there's a huge gap between their next pick, so they also have, some flexibility to, take a guy that they really like, and they're not stuck if they're still drafting for position and need or something like that. They're going to be picking again 12 picks later. So we're here now. Is there another position you're looking at 105 or somebody you've been targeting in that range that you think really stands out to you?
Right off the top, Luke Fortner, I think, would be the perfect fit at center. There's also the Nebraska guy who people have talked about, but I think Luke Fortner would also be able to come in and develop under Alex Mack. So
okay. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If he's on the board, I think that would be the guy. I don't think it's the biggest need right away, but if he's on the board, I think he's a good enough player where you're looking at a future starter.
Absolutely. And I think at that point, you kind of have to, right? Because Cam Jurgens is the guy you mentioned from Nebraska, who I liked a lot, but I don't see Jurgens lasting. The Niners' next pick is at 134 after 105. And I think that's a pretty sizable gap. That's almost a full round of picks. And that's where I'm kind of concerned, where I don't know that a center that you could draft and feel great about being that long-term starter. Like a guy like Fortner, a guy like Jurgens, I think could be a starter. Donovan West is another guy I really like. He's off the board, unfortunately, at this point. But those kind of players, I think, could end up being, synonymous with Trey Lance and this young core for the next 5 to 10 years. And that's a really underrated relationship, I feel like, when you talk about the fact that the center and quarterback have to have chemistry and have to have that, symbiotic relationship, and getting somebody that kind of aligns with Trey Lance's window, I think would be fantastic. So we get the center of the future, and Luke Fortner has a year to learn from Alex Mack. Karan and I are both Cal fans, so we will praise Alex Mack any chance we get. I am really ecstatic that he's staying. It sounds like he's staying for another season. He's a very, very good center, and the 49ers are lucky to have him on the team at this point. So as we're transitioning, now they have 134, 172, 187. Is there anybody in this range that you're kind of looking at where you've been mocking a ton, or you think there might be some value as we're getting here into the fourth round?
There's a good amount of guys to look at. I'm just waiting for my thing to refresh.
There might be a little bit of a delay.
Durgan's just went off the board in this, so hypothetically we could have taken him. But I like Luke Fortner probably the same, if not a bit more. But yeah, as I'm looking, Cordell Flott obviously is a guy that we just talked about. I don't know if I'd still take him here. I think safety is still a big need. I don't think Tarvarius Moore is really someone worth relying on at this point, although I didn't hate him when he played.
These are the safeties still left on the board.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for mine to refresh.
Okay. Are there any safeties that really stood out to you that kind of have been falling in that range? Like, because I know for me personally, I've talked about it a bunch. Like, I really like Leon O'Neal. I think he's really good, and I think he's somebody that can fill in that role that Jaquiski Tart has played, and I think he has the range to do some stuff on the back end similar to what Tart did. Has the physicality again to bang in the box. Has the IQ, understanding of angles, situation, like all the things that I look for in a player, in the replacement for a player like Tart. I think he has. Is there somebody that you're looking at that you think? Because I'm assuming that's kind of where you're going, right? Somebody to be paired on the back end with Jimmy Ward.
Yeah, admittedly, I hadn't really. Leon O'Neal wasn't really on my radar before you guys started talking about him. Javi did the podcast with him, I believe, and then you saw him at the combine. Someone else I know was at the combine also told me he's very good. So I like him a lot. I think this is good range for him. I probably wouldn't take him like in the second or with like the third round pick, but I would probably take him right here. Just now that you've already established corner, edge, and then got an interior alignment, I think you have the flexibility to now say, okay, let's take a Leon O'Neal. This is a guy who's going to be a high character, good player, and have a lot of room to develop behind Jimmy Ward. Maybe Tart comes back, who knows, and maybe Hufanga can hold it down for the season. So yeah, I'd go Leon O'Neal here.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. I'll be honest with you. I talked to a lot of prospects at the draft. There was a lot of really just awesome conversations I had. I was not as captivated by anybody more than I was by Leon O'Neal. Like, this guy just had like an infectious kind of energy where you could tell that it wasn't just lip service. It wasn't just trying to like sound good for an interview. Like, this dude genuinely wants to go out there and be great. And I think he has the tools to go out and be a very solid player in this league. So I'm with you. If they can get him somewhere in that back end of the fourth round, I think that's a great value. I think that he's somebody that, I probably wouldn't take him at 61 based on the way the board's shaping out, but I think he has the ability to have an impact of a player who would be going in that earlier, range and those top. Like, I think he has top 100 talent, but I think the 49ers can get value by drafting him outside of that top 100 based on the way the boards have been sliding.
Yeah, I just saw Jamal mention DeMar Mathis a Pitt. I'm a big fan of him as well. I think he can slide inside or outside. If it's not Marcus Jones, I could definitely see him being a guy that goes to the Niners.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you. I think we'll circle back when we do the draft because I want to talk, pick your brain a little bit, talk specifically about some positional stuff. But I definitely think corner is more of a need than maybe people have been willing to admit or wanting to talk about. Like, I think people think just because they took 2 last year that it's not really a huge need. You can never have too many good corners. You can never have too many good pass rushers. You can never have too many good receivers. And I think the 49ers are at a spot where if they take any players at any of those 3 positions, like, I'm okay with it. And I think just based on the way that their depth has been tested at the corner position, it couldn't hurt to continue to like add good corners in this draft. So I'm totally with you on that. We're at 172. So is there anybody, we've taken an edge in Pascal. We've taken a center. We've taken a corner in Marcus Jones. We've taken a safety. I know a lot of people are expecting a receiver to be taken in this draft. I don't know if you're leaning that way. There's some good running backs on the board. Okay, let's go.
As you said, you can never have enough corners. I think the same thing can be said about receiver, and especially with the way they're kind of I wouldn't say getting fragile, but especially the Niners receivers are taking a lot more hits than other receivers are frequently. So I would definitely bring a guy in. Maybe you can add some return value as well. Out of the names on the board, Tyquan Thornton, he had a great combine. He moves well. I don't know if this is really the range for him. But I don't know. I'm not really on board with any of these receivers, to be honest.
See, so this is where it gets interesting for me, right? And this is where it kind of creates an interesting discussion because I do think that they could. I think there's 4 receivers that are locks for the roster, right? I think it's going to be Ayuk and Devo, obviously, Jennings, and then Ray McLeod. I think beyond that, there's no real like certainty at that position. So there is room to draft a guy, but I'm also with you that like it gets very. You either take a guy in the top 100 or you wait until the 6th and 7th round or sign undrafted guys. Like I'm with you. I wouldn't feel great about spending a pick on any of these guys, to be honest. Like I'm not really moved by any of them. And there's some guys who I think are either going to be there at the end of day 3 or who will be priority free agents who can be just as good, if not better. So is there another position group maybe that you're thinking? I think they could still stand to maybe, add to the interior defensive line. I think they could add a tackle maybe. Is there anybody that you're looking at? A running back? I've been taking Hassan Haskins a bunch in this range. I've taken Devontae Price. I don't know if he's still there or if you had the chance to watch him.
I love Hassan Haskins. I recently watched the Michigan-Georgia game, and his pass pro is awesome. I think he could be a guy that comes in. But I don't know if I'd take a running back this high, especially Trey Sermon might end up being something. We'll see.
So is there anybody specific? I can pull up the big board and just have everybody who's left, and I'll scroll through it a little bit and give you a chance to.
Yeah, I think best player available is also a valid strategy at this point in the draft. Okay, I see one guy I really like, Cordell Bolson out of North Dakota State. I think people are kind of fixating on the wrong North Dakota State prospect when it comes to the Niners. I don't think Christian Watson is realistic.
Whoa. Okay, I was going to say Christian Watson slander. Whoa, no, I'm just kidding. It's not slander.
I don't think it's a realistic pick at this point. I do think Cordell Bolson is an awesome tackle, and especially what he started with Lance in 2019. He started in 2020 and 2021. He's been a 3-year starter at North Dakota State. Similar offense to the Niners. I think he could come in and be a nice developmental tackle behind either McGlinchey or Trent Williams.
So do you think that – so we're going Cordell Volson. So the 49ers do get a Bison for the team. They do get a former Trey Lance teammate. It's just not the one that everybody wants. And I'll throw this out there too. I think it's really funny that, there's this like avalanche of like support from 49ers fans. Like there's 2 players that 49ers fans, it seems like, are more unified on than anybody. And it's Marcus Jones and Christian Watson, to me, seem like the 2 that everybody is like in lockstep on. Yeah. And I agree with you. Like the Niners are like, somebody told me in my, in my most recent mock draft I posted that they didn't like it because they would go receiver at 61. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, that's, hey, if a DK Metcalf falls to the back end, because I think Metcalf went 61, if I remember correctly. Like if a player like that falls, like, hey, you take him and you figure it out later. You add to that room and you figure it out later. I don't see there being a player like that falls to 61. That's such a intriguing prospect where the 49ers are like, all right, we're going to push edge, interior line, the secondary, all these needs back and take a receiver. And that's even assuming like Watson's probably gone in the first 45 picks or so, for being honest. Like he's an extremely gifted athlete. I'll be honest, that was one for me that I was very proud of because when I was watching the hours and hours of Lance game tape last year, I'm like, who's number 1, man? Like this guy's making plays. And I luckily said something about it. So it's not just hearsay. I have receipts. I have tweets to back this up. And I never expected the hype to get this much. I'll be honest with you. I thought he'd be probably like a 4th round, maybe a 3rd round pick based on what I saw. But that was before watching him in person, watching his testing numbers and stuff. He is an insane athlete. And I think he can legitimately develop into a number 1. And if you put him on a team like Kansas City, that's like so good at attacking downfield, like it'd be really hard to pass up for a team like that. And, Kansas City has 2 picks in the top 30. They might trade back 10 spots and add later, and they could add a Christian Watson at 38, So I'm with you. I don't think Christian Watson's realistic, and I think he's a great player. I just don't think that it's something where, we need to be sitting here adding John Lynch on social media because the Niners didn't trade the farm to move up to draft Christian Watson. So having said that, we're at 187 now. So is there anybody at 187 that you're still looking at? There's still a couple defensive interior guys. A lot of running backs and receivers end up falling to this point just based on how deep the classes are.
I think the interior D line is always somewhere that they're going to end up looking, and I think it's valid at this point in the draft.
So is there somebody that's standing out to you? Because I'll be honest, he's not on the board anymore. I don't see I don't see him there. I really like Otito Ogbonnia from UCLA. Yeah. I was a big fan of his, but he's unfortunately gone, so he's not an option for this particular mock. I haven't admittedly watched Noah Ellis. I haven't gotten to see him. I've seen a little bit of McCall from Pascal. Is there anybody from the interior defensive line that you're looking at? Anybody that's sticking out to you here out of these? I can scroll down a bit too and show you some of the guys that are still available down here.
I've seen a bit of McCall just skimming through Pascal tape. Otherwise, of these guys, I've watched the Maryland tight end. I think he's an intriguing athlete. I don't know if the Niners are really in the room for a tight end. And also, is Adam Anderson in the draft? Like, I haven't really looked into that, but he's a great player if you look FD test out with all the off the field stuff.
Yeah, right here, Adam, the edge from Georgia.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take him because he has some like serious off field stuff that I'm not sure how that ended up being sorted out. But as a player, that's a top 100 type of guy.
Okay, so it's kind of a situation where you're banking on the off-field stuff correcting itself, or you're kind of riding with the off-field issues that may be persisting.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware he entered the draft because I believe he got kicked off of Georgia mid-year and then came back, and it was a mess. But
I will say this, talking about Chigoziem Okonkwo from Maryland, the tight end, I think the 49ers should draft a tight end. I think that they need somebody behind Kittle who can really be a dynamic playmaker. And what's cool about Chigoziem is that he really has an ability to line up anywhere. He can line up in line. He can line up as an H-back. He can split out wide. I'm a Michigan State guy on the side, I'll be honest. Like, my football team is Cal, but my basketball team is Michigan State. So I watch a good amount of their football too. I like Connor Hayward. I just don't know. Like, I think Okonkwo is like what I'm hoping Hayward can be, where he can be this kind of jack of all trades. So I don't think that's a terrible pick there. I would feel comfortable taking him. It's funny. It's 187. For whatever it's worth, PFF has him ranked at 186. So maybe they're on board with that kind of selection too. But is there anybody particular you're leaning with there that you'd like at that range?
Yeah, I do like the tight end pick. Another guy that kind of caught my eye was Charlie Kohler from Iowa State. He's a bit ahead of this range, but I think he could be a great tight end too. Upgrade over Rostwelly and Warner. But yeah, I would go with the Maryland tight end here.
Okay, so we'll go Chigoziem Okonkwo. I didn't get a chance to talk to Kohler. I believe his name was Chase Allen, the other tight end, because Iowa State ran a bunch of 3 tight ends. Like, they really utilized the tight ends there.
Yeah.
And for whatever it's worth, he said that he had a pretty solid meeting with the 49ers brass. So, that's another thing too. I wrote a little bit about it. I was surprised, dude. I had beat writers from other teams I was talking with and hanging out with that kept saying, like, man, like, whatever the 49ers are doing here, it's, they're leaving an impression on the draft prospects here, because a lot of these guys came out of meetings with the 49ers feeling really good about it. So, and it wasn't just, I'm not going to trash this team, I'm trying to keep all my options open. It was like, legitimately, you could tell just anybody with like common understanding of body language could see there was a huge difference when they were being asked about, especially the edge guys. I don't know who they sent or if they were doing Zoom calls with Kasarik or something. Every one of these edge guys, man, when I asked them about the 49ers, they were like, dude, their faces lit up. They got excited. And you can't really blame them too. You see the production that these guys get year in and year out. You start to think, man, I could make quite a bit of money playing on this defensive line. But we're here oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's the thing, though. The results speak for themselves with the Niners. A lot of other teams could pitch like this idea of, okay, we're going to develop you. This guy might have had some success in pass coaching, but like the Niners keep on pumping out talent, edge rushers. They've got just talent out of everyone pretty much. Arden Key's the most recent example. Kerry Hyder got paid. Then you look at corners. Even DJ Reed went out and got balled out. Akello Witherspoon he got paid. So there's so many results that are just like undeniable that I can see why the prospects are just completely sold on. Yeah, I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna ball out, and I'm gonna make some money. Like, I can.
Totally what I think? You know what I think people don't talk about enough too? So people always talk about, the 49ers, they're a good team. They can come here, they can win. Like, sure, I know a lot of guys are into that, but you know what's a universal language? Money. And when you can sell that these guys can give their families generational wealth by coming and playing for your team and playing in your scheme, that's going to speak much louder than, hey, you could be a depth piece on a team that might make a deep playoff run. I'm sorry, man. Those checks are guaranteed to an extent. You know, there's a certain amount of money they're guaranteed to be receiving, and that is always going to resonate much more loudly than, hey, you might be able to win a Super Bowl here. Maybe you'll get to an NFC Championship game. I'm sure that's a great bonus, and a lot of guys are very competitive, but that ability to sell the fact that you have recent examples that Karan just mentioned. You could point to DJ Reed, you could point to Arden Key, and these guys who are kind of, not forgotten entirely, but they weren't guys that teams were beating down the door to come sign and bring into their organization. And the 49ers put them both in positions where they're getting these huge paydays they didn't get before. And they did a lot of work too. I'm not saying that the Niners did everything, but they got put into a situation, into a culture, into a scheme that really maximized their value. So I think that is a very, very underrated talking point. There's 3 picks left. The Niners pick at 220 and they pick again at 221. These are both compensatory picks at the back end of the 6th round. I'll be honest, I kind of in some of my mocks have been toying around with moving back or getting future picks because I realistically, I don't see too many guys in this range that are left making the final 53. But I could just be off base there. Maybe there's somebody you like. I'll scroll through with some of the names that are left.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be shocked if they ended up using every single pick in this draft. Like, there's no way that happens.
Me too. I'm kind of at the point where, like, again, I'll tell you the 2 guys that I've mocked the most. There's 3 players that I've mocked the most in this range. Tamari Connor, the corner from Virginia Tech, who's another slot corner guy who's played a lot of nickel. I think he's a good player. I think he can develop into a, starter, at the very worst, a depth piece. Or not say very worst, but he has a role that I can envision him having on that team. Spencer Burford, the tackle out of the University of Texas San Antonio, I like him a lot. I actually think he's going to be gone sooner than this. He's really athletic. Yeah. He's somebody I like. And then the other is CJ Wright, who I kind of have been getting into lately. He's a defensive interior. Played a lot of 3-tech, 1-tech, 0-tech for Georgia Southern, but has he's 6 foot, 295. Like, I'm not going to remember for years when you get a guy like that, people would immediately just compare them to Aaron Donald. I'm not doing that, but you get a guy that has the ability to get that leverage under the pad level, kind of like DJ Jones. DJ Jones was 6 foot, 300 pounds. Like, when you get those guys on the interior that aren't these like massive 6'4", 6'5", and they have the ability to kind of get underneath guys' pad level. And one thing that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, too, part of the reason why Armstead and Jones were so successful was that you had these offensive linemen talking about how hard it was to go play to play when these guys are rotating spots on the defensive line. One play you're blocking DJ Jones, who's 6 feet tall, and the next play you're blocking Eric Armstead, who's 6'8", 6'9". Like, that is extremely difficult to deal with. So he's a guy that I really like. Just throwing some names out there for some people who I've mocked a ton. Is there anybody for you that's standing out? Maybe.
I would say one name that I'm intrigued by that's still on the board is Jack Jones from Arizona State. Very athletic corner. There's a bit of off-field concern with him. I don't know the exact details. I think he's cleaned up his act from his time at USC, and I would probably take a shot on him around this range, especially.
Okay, let's go. We'll go Jack Jones then, because you have another pick at 221. So you're right there. Nobody else jumping in between. Is there somebody else who's there? And I see some real quick. I do see some questions in the chat, so I will pull these up. We're going to be done with the 7 picks here, or 9 picks, sorry, in a second. So I'll go through so you guys can ask Karan if you have any specific questions about prospects, thoughts about that. I'll get to those. I just want to be able to go to them in order and not, bounce around all over the place for my own ability to not be confused. So right here, we have 221 and then 262. Is there anybody that you saw else that was still there that you really liked?
TJ Dale is, I watched a bit of him. I could definitely see him being a guy they take a chance on the interior.
All right, we'll go DJ Dale.
Other than that, I'm kind of unfamiliar with the rest of these guys. I know they're running backs, but I don't know if that's the way they'll end up going.
So the cool thing too is, so we're coming up on the last pick. And again, if you guys have questions, if you have draft related questions, thoughts, opinions, anything like that, please drop them in the chat and I will cycle through them. There's already a couple, so I'm going to start with those, but we'll go through. And please, while I have him here, and we have him here, I should say, ask Karan any questions. This guy is so well versed with these prospects. His knowledge and his just understanding and extensive background familiarity with all of these guys is really impressive. So if you have questions about anybody in the draft or where you think the 49ers should go, please, again, drop them in the chat and I'll get to those so we can ask Karan while he's here. And then I'll drop the link in the description so you guys can go check out his work at Transfer Portal, where he does work as a writer doing this draft content and doing these scouting portfolios. So we're here at 262. This is where it gets interesting for me. It's Mr. Irrelevant. It's the last pick in the draft. But the way I look at it is it's really the first dibs at undrafted free agents. Obviously, it's not exact based on the compensation and the money guarantees, all that stuff. But to me, it's kind of like, all right, well, you can basically take, like, if there's a really high priority undrafted free agent who fell to this area, this is the chance to go out and get him and not chance another team coming in and grabbing them. So is there somebody left that you like? It's funny, the punters always end up the highest on the board. Excuse me, at the end of these mock drafts, but I don't know if there's anybody that stands out.
I would go with a running back here, probably. I think it's inevitable that they're going to add another running back. Kevin Brooks, he's good in pass protection. I haven't really watched him in depth as a running back, but I could definitely see him being a guy that they go after. McCormick, big home run hitter, but Abram Smith is a fun player. I don't know how much his game will translate to the NFL, but I would take him. I liked him when he was with Baylor.
Was Abram the pick? That's who you're going to go with to wrap it up? Is he Mr. Irrelevant? All right.
Yeah.
Abram Smith is Mr. Irrelevant. So let's go ahead. Also, if you do PFF mock drafts ever, ignore the grades. The grading system at PFF is always going to favor, like, if you take, like, corners or if you take, like, edge, like, if you take the positions that, like, PFF has preached are, like, way more valuable than others, that, like, favors their grading. So I've seen mock drafts where you get, like, an A+, and then a year or two later, like, it would be a flat F because those players are just not very good in the NFL.
Yeah, I checked before we started, and I don't believe PFF has outside corner or safety as a need for the Niners. Like,
so exactly. So you could take, like, 7 guards and, like, a center, and PFF will give you an A+. Like, not exactly, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they'll do something like that. So this is the mock draft. We had Josh Paschal, Marcus Jones, Luke Fortner, Leon O'Neal, Cordell Volson, Chigozie Okonkwo, Jack Jones, DJ Dale, and Abram Smith. A lot of variety there. You got a few players from a few different conferences. You get an FCS guy in there. You address some needs. The big thing I'm sure that people would mention that does stand out is that there isn't a receiver. Again, that's where a lot of people are going to point to. I think that they can find an undrafted guy, somebody who isn't on the board for PFF, who I think is going to be really good, and I don't know if Karan has had the chance to watch yet, is Samori Toure, who was at Nebraska this most recent season, was playing at Montana before that, actually broke the record for FCS yards in a playoff game that was held by Randy Moss. He had 303 yards in a playoff game in 2019. He's somebody who I think the 49ers, if they were able to, I would take him with one of those 7th-round picks, hands down, especially if you get to that area where it's a priority undrafted free agent. If he falls to that range, I think he'd be really good, and I think he'd have as good, if not better, of a chance of making the final 53-man roster than somebody that you take at, like, 180 or 187, wherever they're picking in that range. So I don't know if you've gotten a chance to watch Toure yet. I think he's pretty good. He's somebody who I would definitely look at in that area.
Yeah, I haven't. I'll look into him now that you mentioned that, but I recently wrote something about FCS prospects, and one guy I came across was Matt Waletzko from University of North Dakota. I think he's similar to Volson. I think they're both really high upside guys that the Niners should bring in behind McGlinchey or Williams and just develop them. They end up being, like, a starter level player, but I think that's a guy you could definitely take a shot on day 3.
Yeah, and this is the thing too, right? So, like, I think it was Ben Barch, I think, was the guy that came into, had the huge Senior Bowl a couple years ago and got all this hype. I think he came from a D2 or a D3 school, and he got all this hype. And there's a lot of players out there like that who could show the same ability if they just get the opportunity. The unfortunate thing is that there are way too many schools and subdivisions and different conferences and all that stuff to get every single player at a combine, at a Senior Bowl. So there are going to be guys out there where this is where you really see the scouts making their leaving their mark, and where you really see teams separate, where they are going and scouting guys at North Dakota and scouting some of these FCS guys. Because we've seen in recent years, like there's been some really good guys to come out of the FCS. Obviously, Cooper Kupp just won a Triple Crown, as he's talked about as one of the best receivers in the league. He came out of Eastern Washington. Kendrick Bourne came out of Eastern Washington as well. Like there is some historical precedence for these guys out of the FCS coming in. One thing I wanted to add on Toure, I will say too, I actually had the chance to speak with him yesterday. I'm writing an article about it tonight that's going to go out tomorrow. The 49ers met with Toure on Monday. Yeah, Monday. He met with wide receivers coach Leonard Hankerson, and he said the meeting went pretty well. He had really liked what they had to say to him. He liked the interaction, how things went. He really likes Kyle's offense, what they can do. He trains regularly with Kendrick Bourne as well. They're both from the Portland area. So he and Kendrick are pretty close as well. So I'm sure Kendrick put in a good word and mentioned some things from his time there. So I will be writing an article about that will be going out. He didn't get invited to the combine, but he did just have his pro day at Nebraska. And he had 2 drills that historically Kyle has been very high on that he did really well in. One of them was the 3-cone. For the 3-cone, I believe his time would have been 3rd best. And then for short shuttle, his time would have been 4th best if he was at the combine and you put his times up against all the other receivers in this class. So that's another thing where Kendrick Bourne was the same way, where Kendrick Bourne had these really good lateral movement scores and had these good, people always focus on 40 times, but if we're talking Kyle Shanahan in this offense, he tends to favor that short shuttle and that 3-cone over everything. So just something to keep an eye on. Is again Samori Toure. Remember that name because I think somebody's going to end up getting him, and he's going to end up being a very solid get. And look at Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne's a guy the 49ers brought in as an undrafted free agent, and he gets handpicked by Bill Belichick, and he's in the playoffs for New England, catching multiple touchdowns in a playoff game after doing what he did for the 49ers too. Like there is some historical precedence for success for these FCS guys that teams are willing to be patient with and develop. So I'm going to go up right now and see if there's any questions. If you guys have any questions, I'll get to them. Jay, what's going on, dude? Appreciate you coming by. Jamal thinks Volson's a great scheme fit. But I'm going to go through and check some of these questions. If you have any questions about who you think the Niners should take, or if there's a prospect you really like, or you want to ask Karan's opinion on a player, please utilize him while I have him here. I'm so grateful that he was able to give some time to us today to talk about it. He's somebody who I lean on and whose evaluations I trust thoroughly. He's put me on some very, very good players over the years. So I'm going to go through and see if I can find the first question real quick.
It's funny because I think I first found your account. We were arguing over Davis Mills. So
Davis Mills, yes,
he turned
absolutely.
Out to be pretty decent. I mean,
he was good, yeah. And you were somebody that absolutely was on Davis Mills before anybody else I saw last year. Literally did not see anybody talking about Davis Mills as a guy who could be like, a starter in the NFL or somebody that was worth taking a flyer on. You got me to a point where I was like, hey, if the 49ers take another position at 12, like take Davis Mills in the 3rd round and, figure it out. Like before they traded up and before.
All it really took was him torching Cal, and then I was like, okay, yeah, this guy's legit. After that Cal game, and then I went back, watched the Washington game. Like there was a lot of close to like, but. Yeah.
Hey, I'll say this too, that Carson Strong throw that he made, I think he made it to Romeo Doubs against Cal. Cal is just like the victim in all of these where it's like, oh, hey, this guy might be an NFL quarterback. And I think, Justin Wilcox is a good defensive coach. They've had a pretty good defense. So it is pretty telling, especially the Davis Mills year, because that year they had a really good secondary, in my opinion. So I'm with you on that. I'd like to see Cal not be a victim of just, us being like, oh, well, hey, this guy could be a good NFL quarterback. He's kicking Cal's butt right now.
Because if you look back, like all of these quarterbacks have had great games against Cal, and then Justin Herbert was not good against Cal, like by any means. I think Cal wins that game with Chase Garbers, but it's just Wilcox is he's a very interesting coach when it comes to like game-to-game consistency.
Yeah, BSC's got a good point too. Davis Mills was a 5-star recruit coming out. He was somebody that was pretty highly touted. It feels like a lot of these guys were the pocket passing types do get a little bit devalued, but he definitely had some intrigue coming out. I will say this too, really quick, wrapping up on kind of this. People want to hear about 49ers and don't really care about Cal stuff. Well, I have Karan here. I got to talk to Cam Jordan at the Combine and meet him. He was such a nice guy, dude. he says that he feels like this is the best team that they have had in 5 seasons. So for whatever it's worth, I'm not going to sit here and say Rose Bowl, but I'm also not ruling it out. I'm just saying, like, maybe they have a decent team.
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, people don't really want to hear about Cal, but it comes down to the quarterback. We can talk about that more behind the scenes, but I've been paying attention a lot.
Well, the Cal agenda, I will always push a Cal agenda on the show, dude, forever. Let's see. Okay. So what are your thoughts? Okay, yeah, go ahead. That's what I was going to get to.
You're probably going over the same question, so you can pull it up.
Is it Dominique Robinson?
I was looking at the Jalen Armour Davis one, but they both work. Dominique Robinson is a guy that I'd really like to watch. I haven't really gotten into some of the smaller school guys. I believe he's Miami of Ohio, but so people I respect have posted cut-ups of him, and I was definitely intrigued. So that's the guy who's definitely on my list.
And then what about Jalen Armour Davis? We'll get to that one too.
Yeah, that's a funny one because I was recently looking at something about him, but I feel like he totally fell under the radar with how good Alabama's defense has been. 1-year starter is something that's like, it's interesting because I think he'll be an upside guy as opposed to like a day 1 starter. But I can definitely see him being awesome in the right place. There's so many athletic traits there that are just like, it's hard to watch him and not be like, okay, this is a future starter somewhere. If he falls under the right DB coach, he's very good, and I could definitely see him being a fit for the Niners.
Have you had a chance to watch Abraham Lucas from Washington State at all, the tackle?
A little bit. It's hard with the Michael Leach offense. It's hard to evaluate offensive linemen because they're running out of gimmick, air raid, all that stuff. But he moves well. I haven't watched a lot of him, but I think he could be a good player for sure. I'd like to watch more tackles.
So this is my thing too. I got to see him move in person. He moved better than anybody that size that's a prospect that I can remember coming out in a long time. Like just his quickness and his lateral movement, his agility for somebody that size was extremely impressive. So I think you have to bank on the fact, because like Karan said, like they're running that air raid at Washington State. They're throwing the ball 55 times a game. Like at a certain point, like that's going to make it, like he's a really good pass protector in my opinion, but like you'd like to think that's going to happen when you're getting that many reps and your offense is built around throwing the ball that much. I want to, see how does he translate run blocking, and especially how would he translate run blocking in a scheme with the 49ers that, it's not easy to pick up from day one. It's a pretty complex blocking scheme. So I think you could bank on the physical ability for a guy like Abraham Lucas, and you start thinking about that lateral movement and that agility and how quick he looks pulling. But you also have to bank on like getting him better and bank on your own development, which I think the 49ers could absolutely do. But I do think that there is enough room to improve in the run game where it's kind of like it's a bit of a risk at that point in my eyes. Like it's not as much of a home run pick as like a Luke Fortner. I know it's not the same position, but where he could probably come in and do what the 49ers need him to do. Same thing with like Max Mitchell. I really like Max Mitchell. I think Max Mitchell can come in and kind of do, even though the ceiling might not be as high as Abraham Lucas is, I think he can come in and do what they need him to do. And realistically at this point, like the 49, Trent Williams is going to, barring some catastrophic, change of direction where he's either retiring or he's injured or something happens, he's going to be the guy there for the foreseeable future on the left side. It's really what's going to happen with Mike McGlinchey. I know there was a question about that too, so I'll get to that right now. We can talk about it. We'll get your thoughts. I really quickly will say, I think if McGlinchey's healthy, he's fine. Like I think he's a much better tackle than he gets given credit for. I think he's a much better player than he gets given credit for. The only concern really is that quad injury, the ruptured quad tendon, is something that a lot of athletes never fully recover from. So I am of the mindset that if we go out and we see him this year and he is so noticeably different that you can't commit dollars to him long term, then yeah, like you might want to get ahead of that now and just draft a tackle just to have. The hard part is do you spend one of those top 100 picks? Because realistically, you're not going to draft a starter with every top 100 pick you have. It's not ever going to work out that way. But that's your best bet at finding somebody who can be an impact player for this team. So it's hard. Like you don't know how it's going to shake out. But if the 49ers have any doubts about Mike McGlinchey's rehab as of now in the first week of April, I would take a tackle at one of the first 3 spots, or at least take an offensive lineman that has the ability to play tackle, even if it's a guard or somebody that got kicked inside. Like I would take somebody that could be a replacement plan, because you don't want to get into a position where you're overpaying, subpar, average level free agent next year. And the odds of you being able to draft a lineman and have them just plug and play next season are much less than if you draft a guy this year and you give them the full year to kind of absorb the offense and whatnot. So I don't know what your thoughts on McGlinchey are, but that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I like McGlinchey. I think he's a solid player, but
I can't hear you. Cut out. One second. We're having technical. Okay, there you are.
My bad. Is my audio?
No, you're good. Yeah, you're good now. I can hear you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of assumptions being made that we don't know if his recovery is being slowed down or something. I don't know where that idea came from, but I could definitely see. I think they will take a tackle or sign one because, yeah, 5th-year option. We don't know if he's going to be back, but if McGlinchey is there, I think he's a good enough right tackle that you're not going to be able to replace him easily for sure.
Yeah, and I think that he's a guy who just kind of these narratives ran rampant, right? And people just got it in their mind that Mike McGlinchey was not a good player, or he wasn't worth the money, or he wasn't worth this or that or whatever. And I think that's where it's kind of it got a little bit out of hand. So I think he's a really good player. I think he's somebody they need to keep around. This is also where I'm at. I think the 49ers, they need to go whoever is at the top of their draft board at 61 and not reach. I'm with you. I think it's going to be an edge guy. But today they had Kamiko Toure in for a visit, right? And Kamiko Toure is a guy who I think would be a fine rotational piece who, if he's healthy, I think he can be somebody on that rotation making a difference. And if you bring in a guy like that, all of a sudden you're already at 12 defensive linemen. You have a stout group that has proven they can produce at the NFL level. Sure, you can still add more to it. But if they do make a signing like that, I'm kind of unless they really identify a guy hey, man, if Boye Mafe somehow slides to 35, if I'm the Niners and the team's willing to take 61 and 93 to move up and I don't think they would. It'd probably take more than that, obviously. Yeah. But if you could find a way to move up and you identify a guy that you think can be an absolute star on the opposite side of Bosa, absolutely go for it. I just don't see it shaking out like that, unfortunately. I don't think that there's going to be a home run talent that's worth trading up that high, or a talent that's, another team's going to say, hey, I'll take the picks and move back. If there's going to be somebody that teams feel that good about, they're probably off the board. And that's where, again, Trey Lance, if he pans out, none of this matters because you found a really good quarterback, and that's more important than anything else. But this is kind of where it hurts not having that first round pick, because if the Niners were picking at 29 this year, right, it would have been 28 or 29, one of the two. They would have been 29 or 30. If they were picking 29 or 30 this year,
the Chiefs are picking 30 with the
30. Okay, with that pick. Okay, so if they were picking at 30, man, there's a lot of guys I'm looking at there where I'm this could be an impact player for them day one. This is an interesting one. Barrows has them drafting Drake Jackson at 61. I loved Drake Jackson coming into this season.
I could definitely
last year, as somebody who regretfully and painfully watches a lot of Pac-12 football, I'm hey, this guy's good. He's got physical tools. I thought he would be a top 20 pick, dude. I'm not going to lie. I thought he'd be a top end of the first round. He seems to be sliding quite a bit, and he's a guy where maybe you do have to, not necessarily redshirt, but you have to kind of have in a reserved role as he adds some weight to his frame and kind of acclimates. But the physical ceiling there for me is he could be that guy on the opposite of Bosa, where he's this game-wrecking force if it pans out properly. So I don't know what your thoughts on Jackson are. If he's there at 61, he'd be really hard to pass up for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, he's smaller for sure. I think that's definitely noticeable. If that's the reason he's sliding, then so be it. I can't really get behind that, but I can definitely see him being a good guy. Comes in immediately a third down pass rusher in that rotation, and then maybe he develops into being that every down guy that the Niners need across from Bosa.
Well, this is my thing too, right? And Jamal's saying that he's added 25 pounds since the season ended. BSC saying, hey, put him in that D Ford role, 10 to 15 pass rushing snaps, to start with. You can add weight, right? This is my thing. If you think a guy's too short, hey, if there's the odds of them hitting another growth spurt aren't great. They're probably going to be that height. They're going to be that small. That's there's not much that can change. If you're worried about tacking on muscle mass, especially in this day and age, hey, weight rooms have been around forever, but with the advancements in sports nutrition and the team of, people that these NFL teams employ to do that kind of stuff, if you make that investment in Drake Jackson, I promise you there's a group of people that are going to be very committed to adding weight to Drake Jackson, and the odds of it happening are pretty good. So I've never been one that likes this argument that a guy is too big or too small based on playing weight when that can fluctuate. Like, sure, you don't want a guy who's playing at an absurd weight that they have to, where you're like banking on too much of a hypothetical. But with a guy like Drake Jackson, like I think that he can more than Jamal's saying he already added 25 pounds since the season ended. Like Myjai Sanders at the combine, that was one big thing when I was at the combine was people were talking about Myjai Sanders and how he was at 228 or whatever he weighed in at, and it turned out he had like a horrible stomach bug that made him lose a bunch of weight, which anybody who's ever been sick like that knows it's no fun at all. It's not really up to you at that point if you can't keep food down and you're losing weight like that. So again, a guy like Sanders, he's sitting there, he's like 110 on these big boards now. I don't think he falls that far, but I really think he'd be great in a rotational role with the Niners. I think he's a guy, when I asked him at the combine how his meeting went with the Niners and how that went, he offered up a bunch of stuff that I didn't press him about. And he was like, yeah, it went really well. They like my game a lot. They said that they think that I can fit in well and I can find a role from day one with this team. So, he's another guy where I'm like, hey, if he's there at 93, 105, if they took edge players with their first 2 picks, I wouldn't care because you can never have too many pass rushers. Like, and that's the thing is people want receivers. They want variety. They want this and that. To me, you load up on premium positions, and especially with the amount of players that they've had to pay, like, Debo's coming up, Bosa's coming up. They already paid Kittle. They paid Warner. They paid Armstead. You need as many impact players on rookie deals as possible. So if you're able to add a couple players and lighten the load a little bit on a Nick Bosa, on a, Armstead, Ebukam, Amenahue, all these guys, Willis, who are going to be kind of spearheading that top end of this rotation. If you can find those guys and your biggest problem is all of a sudden, oh no, we have 14 really good pass rushers and we have to cut it down to 12 or 11 guys, that's a great problem to have because somebody's going to give you a day 3 pick for a couple of those guys. Like, you're going to be able to get something back. So realistically, the Niners could take an edge rusher with every single pick in my eyes, and I wouldn't even be upset with it. Or if they took all edge rushers and corners, I'd be like, hey, like this is something where if you're playing the numbers game and you're increasing your odds of hitting on one of these guys. So I don't know where you're at with those guys, but that's kind of my whole thing. I'll end my little rant with that. But I think that it's ridiculous that so many of these guys drop because of playing weight when it's so easy to get to a weight that would all of a sudden the whole conversation changes and things are acceptable.
Yeah, I think the thing with Drake Jackson, he started like probably 2 years ago, I'd like to say. He was a lot bigger than he was now, but I think he dropped and now it's kind of like fluctuating. If he added 25 pounds, like I think that's definitely going to help his stock, but he's been the same like fast, explosive player. It was just like, I don't know why he dropped his weight, but I think that's a guy that could definitely come in and be a third down pass rusher. Another guy Jamal mentioned earlier, Logan Hall. I just saw that, but he was really good when I was watching Marcus Jones. Like, that's a guy, he reminds me a lot of Eric Armstead. He's not as good, but I think he can have the same versatility and come in and just be a great presence on the interior, good insurance to Kinlaw, as Jamal said. But yeah, that's a guy I really liked.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I'm a big believer in Kinlaw too. He's somebody who I think when he's healthy, he's still going to be a impact player for the 49ers. He's not somebody like I talked about a bit during I think it was like a draft piece on a Monday or something, and I said that his grade for me is incomplete right now. Like, we haven't seen enough to say either way, and it's way too early to label him a bust. And it's shocking to me how many people are quick to write him off as a bust. Like, hey, if we saw him on the field, he wasn't good and he was hurt, then I'd be like, okay, I see why people don't have that much faith. But in the limited action we saw, he looked like a solid player. And he was never going to be a guy that was going to come in right away and have double-digit sacks right off the bat. He was always somebody who was going to rely on their size initially, be good at filling the run gaps, eat blockers on the interior, and you have to kind of develop that pass rushing bag. So even if he had been healthy, I don't think we would have seen close to his full potential yet. And I think the problem is that people see a top 15 pick and they expect that player to come in right away and be a superstar. Not necessarily a superstar, but they want the production right away. And sometimes guys taken in the top half of the first round need time to develop just as much as guys taken in the mid, fourth round or the fifth round, whatever, day 3 guys. Like, just because you can be a first round talent and still need that time to develop. And I think that gets confused where people think you have to have that immediate floor to be a first round talent, where I think all that matters ultimately is the end result. Like, sure, you don't want to wait 7 years for a guy to realize their potential, but with Kinlaw, like, if he comes out and he's like a viable starter this year and next year he takes that leap forward by year 4, like, that to me is, Great example. BSC saying Rashawn Gary took a while. Rashawn Gary looks like one of the best pass rushers in football right now. And if you would have asked Packers fans a year and a half ago, they probably would have been saying the same things and labeling him a bust. And why didn't we take a receiver for Aaron Rodgers? And why didn't we do this? And he looks like a really good player. Like, who was the other edge? Indianapolis took out of Michigan too. I'm blanking on the name right now, dude.
It's probably you're thinking
of. You know what I'm talking about, right? My God, it's pissing me off. I can't remember. But he's in the same boat where I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the next year or two he ends up being a player for the Colts where he ends up being really good. And it's upsetting me that I can't remember the name because I should remember this. But
Kwity Paye.
Kwity Paye was another guy.
I think he's really good.
Yeah.
I enjoyed watching him a lot. But I think the issue is just that not just Niners fans, but NFL fans in general kind of paint these ideas of like players looking at past players. DeForest Buckner is in this case is kind of like the bar to beat for all of these Niners defensive linemen. And people looked at Armstead the same way. Kinlaw, even Solomon Thomas. Like he was good last year for the Raiders. I enjoyed watching him in pass rush from the interior. They finally used him correctly, and he's got another shot this year. I don't remember where he landed exactly, but
Jets, I think.
Oh yeah, he'll be great. He'll be great with the Jets. Like I really enjoyed watching him last year. But yeah, I think it's just people set unreasonable expectations when it comes to those guys.
My bad. Yeah, I think the funniest thing is too, right? So I went back and I looked at some videos, like those highlight videos where it's like people dubbing announcers talking about players coming out, and it's not game tape. It's all like highlight and hype stuff. Because I'm like, I remember there being like, I see a lot of 49ers fans talking about how Solomon Thomas was always a terrible pick and they never should have taken him. I distinctly remember a certain player they were comparing him to that. Yeah. So I went back and I pulled up this YouTube video. I'll say because I pulled up this YouTube video that was from before that, talking about how Solomon Thomas was one of the best players in this draft. You had guys like Mayock and these NFL Network guys talking him up, comparing him to Aaron Donald, how he's this game-wrecking force and how he's like looks like he's the best player in college football. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, like if they all felt like that, it's pretty easy to see why fans would have and the 49ers would have. But if you ask anybody now, there's no chance they would have taken him. So I just think it's funny how
I will say in all fairness to like the Aaron Donald comparisons, it was really like something that was, I wouldn't say unheard of, but like Aaron Donald's build was not something people had seen beforehand. And when Solomon Thomas came out, it was still a pretty rare thing. Like Donald had just really taken that step to being like the best defensive player in football, and now people were looking for the next Donald. And now I think we've kind of chilled on that. Like there's not going to be another Aaron Donald, but at that point, people still thought it was possible, and Solomon Thomas really fit that profile, albeit not as good.
And he looked like a guy that could have done it. Like I'm a Cal guy. I'm not going to rush to give anybody from Stanford credit that they don't deserve. I think that he definitely was a guy where I could see them sitting there. But the problem is that again, it felt like at times he was too small to make that impact on the inside, and he was too big to make that impact on the outside. I honestly think his best role would have been as like a 3-4 DN, to be honest with you. Like I think that's where he would have probably been a little bit more suited for an every down role. I still think he's fine when he lines up as a 3-tech on the inside, but it's just, yeah, like Aaron Donald is Aaron Donald, and there's not going to be another Aaron Donald. Like, I admittedly sometimes get infatuated with some of these interior defensive linemen because of what a guy like Aaron Donald can do. I think it's so much harder to game plan for having a guy on the interior that can wreck pressure up the middle, pressure through the A and B gaps rather than working outside the D gap, rushing around the edge. So like I admittedly, I'll say this, I hope people don't like stop watching my stuff because of this. I liked Quinnen Williams more than Nick Bosa, admittedly. I thought that Quinnen Williams was I talked myself into saying that he could be somebody that could dominate from the interior and could dominate having him and Buckner in the 3-tech with Armstead still out wide. I really like Nick Bosa as a player. I just talked myself into the theory of having that, an additional guy that can really wreck games from the interior. And I was so infatuated with that idea that it made me just overthink one of the most easy draft picks you'll ever have. Like Nick Bosa was like one of the most pro-ready prospects we've seen in the last decade, right? And I was able to like somehow outsmart myself. And this is the funny thing is I am not the, obviously arbiter of, draft decisions or thoughts, but like the way I sit there and do that, NFL teams do the same. Think about Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons went 12th overall last year. Like Micah Parsons was one of the best players in that draft, and it was pretty obvious. Maybe it was different if it wasn't such a QB heavy draft class, but a lot of teams overthought Micah Parsons, and he's now one of the better pass rushers, defensive players, whatever you want to call it in the NFL. So I'm not trying to make excuses for myself. That was a big L on my part. And I think Quinn Williams is a good player. He's not Nick Bosa.
Williams is awesome. Yeah. I think he's going to be really good next year if he stays healthy.
But he's not Nick Bosa, and that's where it's kind of for me. Like it's a good thing I'm not running this team because I would have probably picked Quinn Williams over Nick Bosa. And I will say this: every time I bring that up, I expect to just get ridiculed and have tomatoes thrown at me and stuff. There's a lot of people who tell me they actually felt the same way, so it makes me feel a little bit better about it. I remember there was
a good amount of people, especially with Nick Bosa's injury, that kind of talked themselves.
So that was my thing. Was I was worried he wouldn't be able to stay healthy, but I think even so, Nick Bosa is just so technically sound. And I think the same thing that's going to happen this year is I think teams are going to overthink Kayvon Thibodeau. I think Thibodeau's I just think he's a really good player, and I think that. From what
I think teams are overthinking this year that I'm currently writing something about is Travon Walker. I think he's really good. People are sort of being disingenuous. I don't know if he's really the number 1 overall pick. I think Bucky Brooks just mocked him there, but I really enjoyed watching him. I think people are underestimating how valuable he is on early downs. And then he has all the traits to be a great pass rusher eventually.
So what do you think about Aiden Hutchinson? Because I'll be honest with you, I think that he's a solid player, but to me, I see a guy like Ryan Kerrigan where, they'll be a good player for your team for a while, but I don't think he's ever going to be so I think he's always going to be somebody that's going to never be appreciated fully because he'll always be compared to a number 1. He'll always have the status of being a number 1 overall pick if Jacksonville takes him. Yeah. I don't see him being a perennial Pro Bowl, all pro game changing level player, but I see him being a guy that's in the NFL for, a better part of a decade as a starter, if that makes sense, which still has value, but I'm not taking that first overall if it's me.
Yeah, I think my hot take was that I was just thinking I would take Travon Walker over him if it came down to the Jags pick, but my comparison for Hutchinson that I've kind of been seeing as a high-end thing is I can see him being Trey Hendrickson. I think that profiles really well, and he's a great player. I think Hutchinson will be good. And another guy is Brandon Graham is kind of in that same, he's a great run defender off the edge. He'll be a solid pass rusher, and I think he'll last a really long time, but I don't know if that's exactly what you want to get at first overall. I think Kayvon would be a much more appealing pick there. And then
you have to swing for upside there, right? Or even if you took a guy like Ekwonu, I really like Ekwonu. If you swing for one of these big athletic offensive, or Evan Neal, I know a lot of people really like. I don't see the hype with Hutchinson, to be honest. And I thought that he had some good games. I thought that he put some solid stuff on tape, but I wasn't blown away. And after watching him up close and in person, I wasn't all that, impressed with what I saw personally. So it wasn't a situation where it's oh no, when you see him in person, this is what's blowing teams away. I don't see that being the case. And if it was a team other than Jacksonville, I feel like they would maybe do something like take Travon Walker or take, a different player. I just feel like they're going to, and then it's going to be really the draft really starts with the Lions in my eyes. That's when it really gets interesting. And maybe they take a Walker, maybe they take a lot of people like Kyle Hamilton. I admittedly am kind of not really the more and more I watch him, the more I'm this is a good player, but am I spending a top 3-4 pick on him? I don't know that I would personally. I'm kind of
there's been a big flip on Hamilton in the past, probably the past few weeks that I've been seeing. I still like him. I think he's a really good safety prospect compared to what we've seen in recent years. But there is room to be concerned. But my comparison for him as a high end is Justin Simmons, and I think they both didn't test entirely well, so that's still something I can kind of hold on to and say this hasn't really proven me wrong yet. But I don't know. I think he can land with the Jets or maybe the Giants or something. I think he could be a great player, but we'll have to see.
So this is kind of where I'm at too, right? I think that a team would be better off. If I was maybe the Lions have some some PTSD from taking Okudah a couple years ago, but I would take Stingley at 2, or take if they really like Sauce Gardner, I would take one of those guys. I would take the swing at a corner, or maybe Walker's another guy I'd look at. But if I'm one of those teams in the top 5 and it's Kyle Hamilton or one of those corners, I personally would take the corners and try to bank on that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about Gardner. I'm not as high on him. I still think he's a great player, but I would definitely take the chance on Stingley. I think all the medicals have tested out now. He tested at his pro day today, but I would take a chance on him up there. I also like Trent McDuffie a lot, if that's someone team wants to take a chance on in the top 10. But
what about Kyer Elam? Because this is really funny. So I did not watch that much Florida, to be honest with you. I watched Florida's offense like crazy last year for Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney, but I didn't really watch their defense all that much. And I admit I don't watch Florida games all that often. I'm not, when I zone out and watch college football on Saturday, I'm not like diligently scouting players. I just wait till I get game film to do that. So I never really watched their defense, and I was watching them against Alabama from this past season, and I'm like, damn, this guy number 5 is like clamping Mechie. He's getting hands on him at the line of scrimmage. He's running with him downfield. I'm like, this guy's really good. Like, how come I'm not really hearing much about him? I don't know if he's still in here, but Jamal like DM'd me and was like, hey man, that guy's like a projected first-round pick. And I'm like, who's this Kyer Elam guy? He's like, oh, he's been like projected as a first-round pick for a while. I had like no idea. So it made me feel pretty good. Like, I'm like, okay, well, my eyes aren't, deceiving me. I'm glad that I, wasn't missing entirely, but I also felt like a complete dunce because I'm like on my timeline on Twitter, like, oh, who's this guy from Florida? I haven't seen, who is this guy? And everybody's like, dude, this guy's been talked about for like 2 years. Like, where
I remember seeing that, thinking the same thing.
I felt very dumb. I'll be honest. I was like, oof.
Yeah, I mean, dude, he's so good. Like, another unpopular take, I think he's better than Gardner. Like, you look at the two, and what does Gardner do that Elam can't? And he's a better athlete.
So this is my thing too. Is like Gardner's like, and again, I people always say like don't scout the helmet, scout the player, and all that, and that's great. But when Elam's going up against guys that are going to be drafted in the first round in the NFL, and Gardner's going up against guys who aren't going to be in the NFL, it's kind of like, I don't know, man. Like that's a factor in for you too, yeah.
To an extent, although I would say they both played really well against Alabama. I think Elam played a bit better, but they both looked solid. Elam on Jamison Williams was a great matchup. I thought he did really well.
So what do you think? Who's your right now? Who are your like top receivers in this? It doesn't have to be necessarily in order, but like who are your guys that you have at like the top? And is Jamison like at the top for you too?
I wouldn't say Jamison's my wide receiver 1. He reminds me a lot of Will Fuller. I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. Will Fuller was awesome when he was healthy, but I think he's getting a bit overrated when it comes to like he's not wide receiver 1. I saw Chris Sims, I think, was the guy who put him there, but I think he's probably like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. Sky Moore, I love him. I think he's going to be a great player wherever he lands. I would say he's probably in my top 5. Traylon Burks is another guy who teams are probably going to go after when they're looking for that next Debo, next AJ Brown. I don't know if you've watched him, but he's great to watch. I don't know how much it'll translate, but I think at the very least he'll be like a great player to get the ball and like get on design touches.
Yeah, I got to actually. It was funny. The second day I was at the combine, I got there like super early. He was the first receiver on the podium, so I got there at like the front of the scrum and got to talk to him. And he's a guy who definitely like looks the part of like an NFL player. He passed the eye test. Like physically, he looks like somebody that can take on that physical role. And again, like somebody who can get the ball in space and create and do all those things. I'll be honest with you. I still think the 2 best receivers in this draft are both coming from the same team. I still think the 2 best receivers in this draft are Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I've been big on Olave for a long time. I'm not saying I think he's going to end up being like a top 5 receiver in the league the way Justin Jefferson is, but I think Olave is going to be a guy where we look back on and there's players that got taken ahead of him where it's kind of like how did no offense, like kind of like how Jalen Reagor went ahead of Justin Jefferson, where you look back on it and you're like, how did this happen? Because he's so smooth. He to me is what Kyle Shanahan looked at Dante Pettis and saw and thought Dante Pettis could be, which I don't think like people hear that and they're like, oh God, like why would you want to draft another Dante Pettis? If Dante Pettis panned out, he would have been a really, really good receiver. Like the good we saw from Dante Pettis would have been a phenomenal player in this offense. And like when I look at Olave, he's a guy that reminds me, he's just smooth, really good route runner. I think he's very underrated when we talk about attacking the ball at the catch point. And I still think like as of now, and I don't think it's like a hot take because I still see a lot of people mocking him top 10. I still think Garrett Wilson's the best receiver overall in this class.
I can agree with that. I think Wilson's awesome. With Olave, it's like I watch him and I think he's going to be a great receiver outright, but I don't know how much that's ceiling. Obviously, that's something that is it the floor, is it the ceiling? Like, what are you picking for? But when you talked about his catch point, like attacking the ball at the catch point being underrated, he reminds me a lot of the Marvin Jones in that sense, like just being in really steady hands, great route runner. Like, I think if he's Marvin Jones, he's a great wide receiver too, at the very least.
Yeah, so that's what's so funny to me is I actually like out of like the Ohio State's pumping them out because I honestly think that Jackson Smith is going to end up being better than like either of them. He's insane,
He's
dude.
amazing.
Like
that Utah game was probably the greatest performance I've ever seen.
It was just unbelievable. So yeah, like they're pumping out good talent there. I wanted to ask you too, where are you at with Drake London? Because I'll be honest with you, I'm not like super sold on Drake London. People are comparing him to Mike Evans, which I think is disrespectful to Mike Evans personally. I think Mike Evans is much better than people give him credit for. And that's not to disrespect Drake London at all. I just don't I don't see that at all. And he to me is a guy where I don't see him really winning with separation or winning with technique. And I think a lot of his success really just came from like physically outmatching a lot of Pac-12 DBs. And I don't know that that's going to translate that well. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I'm kind of like, I'm not spending a top 15 pick on this guy if I'm a GM.
I mean, it's weird. You look at every 6'5" receiver is going to get compared to Mike Evans, like it or not. But he's extremely dynamic once he gets the ball. And the ways they used him were very interesting, and I could definitely see him fitting with some NFL offense in that way. But at the same time, he's pretty stiff. He's not going to be a great vertical threat. A lot of it, like, I could definitely see him being a great guy, but wide receiver 1, no, I don't really see him as like a top 3 receiver in this class, maybe even top 5. But he's a high day 2 guy for me, and I think he could be really good if he lands in the right spot.
Like, I'll be honest with you, like I think, and maybe this is like I sound crazy saying this, I was more impressed with Michael Pittman coming out of USC than I am Drake London right now. Like, I thought Michael Pittman, and he was a top end of the second round guy. Like, I'm not seeing anything from Drake London that I don't think Michael Pittman can do. And I think Michael Pittman's a little bit more fluid and a little bit more of that downfield threat. So it's kind of wild to me that this guy's getting talked about as like a top, there's mocks I'm seeing where he's going to these teams at like the Jets at like 9 overall. I'm like,
I mean, on the topic of that Pittman draft, I don't think they're the exact same player. I think London's a bit better, but I do remember Denzel Mims getting a lot of hype that year, and I had the same concerns with him. Like, yeah, he's big, yeah, he runs fast in a straight line, but aside from that, you're not really looking at much, and he hasn't panned out to say the least. I mean, he didn't really see the field.
A bad Jets team too, where you're not backlogged for snaps behind anybody notable, and like.
Yeah, I saw some video that like the Jets posted some video of like the receivers doing the ladder drill where they're just like doing their agilities and whatnot. It was like all these guys did, and then 5-second pause, and Mims was just coming in like doing it in pretty much slow motion. I'll send that to you later. It was really funny.
Oh man, yeah, and see that's the thing is like that's a guy that like a lot of Niners fans wanted when they took Ayuk. That's a guy that a lot and like who's another player where I think he's going to end up being much more recognized nationally. Just getting better. Like a lot of people think it's just because Trey Lance is going to be the quarterback. I think that'll help based on his skill set. But I think he's another guy too that it took some time for him to really come into form and be a guy that, was going to have a complete game. Like he got way better as a run blocker this past year. And I understand when people are talking about receivers, they don't want to talk about run blocking. They want to see spectacular catches and yak and touchdowns and all that. But you have to be able to run block in the NFL, especially if you're going to be in a run heavy offense. I thought he got a lot better. Who's a guy? So
hold on. I have a question for you about the 2020 draft. A lot of people have been talking about Laviska Shenault and throwing that name around as a guy who's probably going to get traded this offseason. How do you feel about that as like a potential option for the Niners?
I think for the Niners, he'd be great. If I was like any just like random team, I'm probably not giving up too much. But if I'm the 49ers and you can be like we saw, I don't know. He hasn't moved yet. Sorry, I got Parker and Harry mixed up because Harry's going to move because of Parker. Like, what's Jacksonville going to get from realistically? Like a 4th round pick, probably. Like a 5th round pick.
Because he wasn't really getting on the field with like their last year's game. So
I personally would like to see him in an offense like this, just based on like another place I like to see him. To be honest with you, is like Green Bay. Just somewhere where they can get him the ball in space. Because what I saw when I saw him at Colorado was a guy that did have that good ability after the catch, was kind of a gadget player. He got compared a ton to Cordarrelle Patterson. I wouldn't be opposed to it for the right price. And again, hey, like if you're the 49ers and you can give up your pick at 172 this year for Laviska Shenault, do it. Like, why not? Like, especially if it like went like the way our draft did earlier and you were able to address tackle and center and corner and safety and all those, I think your chances of getting an impact player and getting somebody who's actually going to contribute with that pick at 172 is much higher with Laviska Shenault than it is with a guy that's left on the board there. So if they're able to do that, like, yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely on board with that for sure. But it depends on the price, because at a certain point, like, Niners fans are going to want them to trade for N'Keal Harry. And as somebody who, I wanted to believe and think that he could get right. He can't separate at this level, and he's just not.
It's not really an asset. I think he's going to get cut realistically.
Yeah,
and the Niners could sign him. They showed a lot of interest in him before the draft, but I don't think he's really pushing the needle over. He's at the very most, he's probably around where Jawan Jennings is. They both provide about the same thing. They're good blockers, not very good separators, and decent red zone threats. But yeah, I don't think he's really worth looking into.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point, like, I'm at too, where it's like it's so hard to, like, you look at these guys, because Harry looked good at Arizona State. Like, he was a solid prospect. So it's like so hard, because these guys can look really good when they're playing at the collegiate level.
Yeah.
But it's not always going to translate, right?
Especially in the Pac-12, you see these guys every year. J-Jaw was the biggest example of that. He's going out making these massive, like, one-handed catches against shitty small DBs, but once he got to the NFL, he doesn't even get on the field. Harry's the same thing. Maybe London's the same thing. I don't know.
Are you saying you don't believe in Simi Fehoko? Are you not a Fehoko stan?
I liked him when I watched Davis Mills. I think he's a bit more dynamic than J-Jaw, but I don't think he's ever really. You'll have a chance with the Cowboys. Not that their wide receiver room is a bit slimmer, but I don't know.
Yeah, and see, like, that's the thing, is that, like, these teams talk themselves into, like, sometimes it really, like, there's been plenty of guys who are freak athletes that don't translate, but to me, it's kind of like, how do you trick yourself into talking yourself into JJ Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf? Like, that to me, it doesn't make any sense, dude. Like, or Andy Isabella over DK Metcalf. Like, I admittedly was somebody that first where I was concerned that DK wasn't, the most fluid route runner, and I thought that his lateral test scores there, like, that was concerning, his 3-cone and all that.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, like, dude, the guy's 6'4", made purely of muscle, and he runs in the 4.3s like that. You draft those guys when they come around, and hey, if you miss on it, fine, whatever. Like, you drafted a really fast David Boston, it didn't work out, you move on. But to me, it's like incredible, and this is one thing that's so funny to me too, because we'll never know if it's true. Like, Kyle talked about how they really like Josh Allen, and if Josh Allen came out a year earlier, they'd probably draft Josh Allen, which sounds really good now, but we have no way of knowing if that was ever true or not. But Chris Sims wrote an article for Pro Football Talk like 2 years ago, and he pretty much said that if DK was still on the board, DK went 3 picks ahead of Jalen Hurd, sorry. Yeah. And he said that if DK was still on the board, he thought the 49ers would take him. And he was like convinced the 49ers were going to take him. So I don't know if that's just like revisionist history, his opinion, because he also thought the 49ers would take Mac Jones. So there's also
that same draft, a lot of people, like, I don't remember where it exactly came from, but the rumor was if N'Keal Harry went 1 pick before Debo, they would have taken him if that hadn't happened. So you never know with all that.
Yeah, and it's so hard to tell. But if you think about an offense that would have had Debo and DK in the same, like, that's just like mind blowing to think about. So you might get a guy that falls to 60. Like, dude, DK's a really good player. Fred Warner was a 3rd round pick. Kittle was a 5th round pick. Like, we talk a bunch about these guys that were these later round picks that ended up being really good. Azeez Al-Shaair is undrafted. Like, there's a lot of really good players that can be had in those later rounds. And I think that's where the 49ers can really make their mark on this draft. And they're not necessarily going to draft, a Pro Bowl, all-pro like Kittle or Warner, but they can get a solid player. They can get a starter or two in the secondary. They can get a future starter on the offensive line. And I think they're at the point now where, like, they don't really, outside of the safety spot and the nickel corner spot, there's not anywhere that I'm looking at where I'm like, oh man, this is such a glaring need for this team right now. Like, in terms of like a starting 11 guys on the field at the same time. Like, they don't have that much of an issue. Like, I know a lot of people don't really like Brunskill. They think right guard's a huge need. I think Brunskill's fine for now. Like, I think
he's a great guy to have around, even if you don't think he's the best, like, right guard. What they put him through in 2020 was, like, ridiculous. I'm surprised he's still, like, standing after all that.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, like, what's your worst problem if you do take a guard that ends up being better? Like, then you slot them into right guard, and then you have Daniel Brunskill, who can literally play any position on the offensive line in a pinch if you need him to, which is like, I don't think people understand how valuable that is, or I think it gets overlooked, I should say, how valuable it is to have a guy where at any moment you could have him play left guard one week, and then the next week you have him playing center, and then after that you have him playing right tackle. Like, those guys don't just grow on trees. You can't just find Daniel Brunskills lying around in the weeds. Like, and I just think he gets so much ridiculous, unfair criticism directed his way. So yeah, I'm kind of there with you too. Another name that I was impressed with when I saw in person was I like Dylan Parham out of Memphis. I like him a lot. I don't know that he'll be there with those 2 third-round picks they have. I don't know if I'd take him at 61 either, but he's somebody, if I were to like trade back, I would look at. I don't know how you feel about Nick Cross. I think he's a guy that's going to end up going, like, he's somebody that they if they like, they might have to take at 61. Yeah. And that to me is like, they have to come in and start from day one if you're taking them at 61 at that position, in my opinion. Like, you can't take a developmental guy at 61 if they're going to be a safety. Like, you can do that at a couple other positions where you have the depth. You don't have the luxury of redshirting a guy. So, like, you can't, like, to me, it's kind of reckless to take a guy at 61 unless you envision that.
Yeah. That's my thing with Cross. Like, I don't know if he's going to be a starter year one. I think he has all the athletic traits, but I don't know if you can put him on the field. It's the same thing with Hufanga last year. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if you can get away with putting that guy on there and then saying, okay, Jimmy Ward, Trevarius Ward, they're going to kind of mask his flaws but help him strive in the long term. Like, I don't know if that's really an option you have.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really hard, right? Because then you start getting put in this position where, yeah, you want guys to develop and get the on-field reps, but you also have a really good team and you want to win football games. And, like, to me, this is where, again, it hurts that the Niners are picking at the back end of the second round, like a guy like Jaquan Brisker. I think Jaquan Brisker could come in and start right away. I think he's somebody who could slot from day one and start.
That's a guy who could definitely start right away. But
but do you as the Niners, do you trade up from 61 to 45, let's say, if he's there? Like, moving up 16 spots is going to cost you. Are you going to move up to take a safety at that spot? Like,
I think you have the assets with all those conditional picks, but I don't know if I'd trade up for, like, Jaquan Brisker per se. I would trade up for Lewis Sign, though. That's my guy.
Okay.
The safeties, I would trade up for Lewis Sign. And then if a Nick Cross falls to you, if a Kirby Joseph falls to you, Brian Cook, those guys are there, yeah, I'd take them, but I don't know if you can start them right away. So, yeah.
Yeah, like, do you take, because that's why I like Leon O'Neal, right? Because I think Leon O'Neal is capable of winning that job in camp, but he's also not somebody where you're so dependent. Like, if you invest a 4th-round pick into him and he ends up being a starter, that's a net win for you, but you're not completely dependent on it from day one. Like,
yeah, I think if you go into camp with the thinking of, okay, between Moore, Hufanga, and one of these rookies, someone's going to be a decent safety, like, I can see the thinking, but I don't know if that's really, like, the way I would go. I would just go for the best safety available. If there's a guy there who you think can start, take him. Don't take, like, another guy to just throw into a camp out a little bit later.
Well, that's where I'm at with the corner position. I don't know if you feel the same way. Like, I think Emory Thomas has great physical traits. Like, he's fast. He has good length. He turns his hips really well. But I admittedly don't think that he's somebody where I'm not going to address the position. Like, I didn't see enough from him where I'm like, okay, like, this is our guy for the next 5 seasons. Like, we're going to, we have a really good player here. He can turn into that. It was his first season. He has plenty of time. But I'm not sold on that. And, like, I really like DeAndre Lenore. I liked him and Graham a lot coming out of Oregon. I watched them a ton. Excuse me. I don't look at that 49ers DB room and have that much confidence outside of Ward and Mosley. We're talking corner position, sorry, because both Wards I obviously have a tremendous amount of confidence in. So, like, for me, it's kind of like, hey, if there is a Marcus Jones, or I don't know if you like Emerson at all, the corner from
that's the guy who I was going to bring up.
He's somebody like 61, like, I wouldn't be opposed to it, man. And if they're really content on, having this role where you kick in Mosley on the inside, Emerson's a guy who maybe not right away, but eventually, in my eyes, could be a starting corner on the outside for you. Yeah. And, I'm going to write something about it because at this time of year, I'm trying to abstain from the whole, like, Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance stuff as much as possible. So I'm trying to space out a lot of my articles, but I think I am going to write something about their, like, the way they've addressed the corner position and how they seem much more inclined to bring in veterans. Obviously, they just signed Ward. They signed K'Wan Williams in the first round of free agency. They signed Richard Sherman a couple years ago, too. But the only corner that they've drafted with a top 100 pick is Akella Witherspoon. Yeah. In 5 drafts. That's crazy when you think. Yeah, no, absolutely. But when you think about that, like, that to me is crazy that you've only spent 1 top 100 pick on a corner. Like, you've spent as many top 100 picks on the cornerback position Or sorry, no, not that. You've spent one, right, on that. That means that there's only one corner that you've drafted ahead of where you drafted your punter. Like that to me is just like mind-boggling when you think. And I'm not somebody that like harps on this. Oh, they took Mitch Wisnowski in the 4th round. Like I could see why they liked it. I understand, like it made sense. And I don't think that there was really anybody between where they took Wisnowski and where they took Greenlaw where I'm like, oh God, how could they take a punter here? They missed on this player.
If you look back at that, a lot of people wanted like Ryan Finley and like all these backup quarterbacks who aren't very good. So I'm not too concerned with like that pick in hindsight.
But if we're talking about, like, I'm not gonna lie, for like a clickbaity or like headline, like that would make me click on it if it was like, why have the 49ers only spent, one top 100 pick on a corner? They've taken one corner ahead of where they took their punter. It doesn't make sense. And like to me, I'm not gonna lie, I personally think DJ Reed is a little bit better than Ahkello Witherspoon. That's just my own opinion. I don't think Ahkello Witherspoon's a bad player.
I like Spoon a bit more, but I can see where
that's fair. And I think he has the physical traits that are maybe give him the edge for a lot of people. I don't know if that's how it is for you. That size does matter, but like for me, like the 2 best corners you've drafted aren't with the team anymore, and one of them played their most meaningful snaps for the Seattle Seahawks and is now paid by the New York Jets. So it's like. That's something that I would like to see straightened out. And I think that there's this whole thing where they say the 49ers don't prioritize corners. That's not true at all. They just gave a bag to Ward. They gave a bag to Richard Sherman. Like Kalen Williams was one of the first signings that they made. I just think that they, for whatever reason, are reluctant to invest high capital in the draft on corners. And at this point, I don't think it's a coincidence when I'm looking back on it. I'm like, it's been 5 years and you've done it one time. That to me is where it's kind of like, and hey, last year they needed a quarterback, and Surtain and Horn are both off the board. So maybe I don't fault them. Like those guys both look like they were good NFL players.
See, it's weird because I think realistically they're going to end up bringing back Jason Verrett, and he does have he has more upside than pretty much any other option there is. Like even at 31, however old he is now, that's when he's healthy, he's a top 10 corner. He's shown it. Not often, but when he's on the field, he's amazing. So I think he'll be back. And then, it's like they went into that draft kind of assuming Verrett was going to be healthy, and that obviously didn't end up being a great idea. But now that they have the luxury of kind of with Ward, they can have him as like a depth piece. I definitely think Verrett will be back.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. That's a really interesting point because I think Verrett, is a guy who, if he doesn't pan out at this point, I think we all know like there's an injury history, and unfortunately, like that's kind of just how the human body works. If you start to break down at a certain point, like it's Jason Verrett's not choosing to go out there and get hurt. And yeah, I know that's obvious, but I have to say that because there's a lot of people who look at it as if it's like the player's fault when they get hurt, and like the players are evil for taking a paycheck for a team when they have injury history. That's why you work out some kind of incentive-laden deal, and you work out something on a vet minimum. With some kind of playing game incentives and snap total incentives and all that stuff. Because I'm with you too. Like I think realistically having Verrett be an option there, and like I'll be honest with you, I honestly think that like Verrett in the slot wouldn't be the worst thing. And if you have a scenario where you can have Ward and Mosley outside, let's say you're playing the Rams and they're throwing Cooper Kupp in the slot for 70% of snaps, I'd take a healthy Jason Verrett in the slot over any of those guys. Like you're still matching him up and allowing him to shadow their number one option.
And I mean, even at that point, Verrett outside, Mosley inside, that's not that bad either. I mean, there's a lot of options there.
Yeah, I think Emmanuel Mosley's a much better credit than he gets credit for too. Or he's a much better player, than he gets credit for. There's a lot of 49ers players that I look at where I'm like blown away that they have the reputations they have, or they just don't really get talked about it much. Like Mosley's way better than he gets credit for. Brunskill's much better than he gets credit for. Tart was another player who's much better than he gets credit for. Finally, people are coming around to Azeez Al-Shaair. The next guy, and maybe we can close on this because I'm realizing now how long we've had you here, so I don't want to run you out here, but I do have to get to one thing while I have you here. Coach, what's up? I appreciate anybody who's trying to send me a super chat. Unfortunately, I still have some grinding to do in terms of watch hours and subscribers. So once I hit that threshold, I need to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need to hit 400 watch hours. I'm making some pretty good, 4,000 watch hours. So I need to hit those to get monetized. So the more you guys watch, the more you spread the word, the more you share my stuff, tell people to subscribe. It will help me, and then I will gladly take money from you guys. I don't expect it, but it is greatly appreciated. So until then, you're getting free content from me, man. I hope there's not ads or anything you guys have to watch either, because I'm certainly not getting compensated for it on my end. So for the meantime, unfortunately, Coach, that is the reason why super chats aren't an option. But hopefully one day when they are, I will graciously accept them. But until then, I cannot. So to wrap this up, there is a player that really quickly, I'll have you talk about this. What do you think about David Bell? Because he's a guy that I do like personally too, and I think
I really liked him at Purdue when I was watching Rondale Moore. It was like, okay, this number 3 might even be better than he is, but then he tested and it was like not good at all. So I'm kind of conflicted. The film speaks one thing, and then the testing kind of backs it, like with his long speed and whatnot. But then at the same time, I don't want to be completely out on him. So I think he's probably a late round 2, early round 3 type of guy. But yeah, I liked him a lot on film though, so we'll see.
I'm with you there too. He's another guy where I think he's if he's there at like 75, 80, something like that, and I'm a team, I'd take a chance on him. I think he can be a good receiver. I think he's very technical. I liked his route running ability. I thought he had good hands. I thought he looked really good in some games against some big time opponents in the Big Ten too, which I'm kind of quirky in that way. Like I do put more stock into guys playing big moments like that against big. Like for me, like one of the big things that sold me on Rashawn Slater and why I thought he was so good was he looked really good against Chase Young and Ohio State. And that was one of the things that really sold me on him. And I think stuff like that does translate. I'm the same thing. I don't care about 40 times if they back it up on game tape and the speed doesn't, alter them from being a game-changing player. Because there are times where it will reflect it, but I'm with you. Like I think, hey, if a guy runs 4.7, but they look like they play at 4.5 or 4.4, 4.5, something like that, I'm with you. I don't care. When the pads and helmets are on, that's always going to weigh more. But I do think and this is the other thing too, is that these teams all have like GPS data on most of these players too. We as the public don't really get that. So that's where it gets interesting. We're able to compare GPS data because that to me matters. If you can see how fast the guy is running in game, like Brandon Ayuk didn't have, he's hurt. He didn't have a great 40 when he was testing coming out, but his GPS speed at Arizona State would have put him amongst the best players in that class at in-game speed. So I'm definitely with you on that. I'll answer this really quick. I love sushi. I don't know about you, Karan. Sometimes we'll talk about food and stuff in here. So I'm a big sushi guy myself. I can't get enough of it. Sushi, sashimi, any of that stuff. It's really funny because I do not like cooked fish. Can't stand salmon. Don't really like cooked fish at all. I'm not really a big fish guy. But raw fish, I will eat it every single day if I could. So I'm a big sushi guy. I don't know about you, Karan, if you want to jump in on that.
I didn't like it that much growing up, but I've come around to it. So yeah, I'm a sushi guy. It
depends where you get it too. If you get good sushi, it's really good, and if you get bad sushi, it's going to turn you off to the whole thing as a whole. So we're going to wrap this up. We're coming up on an hour 45. I'm really gracious. Karan gave me this much time. Mariah, hello. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate you guys. Really quickly too, Coach. Where is it? You can come on before I get monetized. I would be happy to have you whenever. I understand you're big time. If you only want to come on to a monetized channel, I get it. You have an image to uphold. But if you want to come on before then, you're more than welcome to. So we were talking about players that don't get the love they deserve and who might be breakout guys and this and that. One guy that I have been in, kind of lockstep with, Karan, for a while, and I know he kind of spearheaded this movement. I want to give him the proper credit for that. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. This dude is a baller. He can play. He is another one of these converted safeties, moved to linebacker, great sideline to sideline speed, really good special teamer. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is a really good player, and he will be respected. Karan, do you have any thoughts on DFF or anything that you'd like to speak on?
It was honestly I wouldn't say it was a joke at first, but it was kind of funny at first. But he's like a legitimate At the very least, he's a great special teams player. When he had to come and play linebacker, he's a great linebacker for. That's not a concern for me. Linebacker is set. You've got 4 guys who can legitimately be on the field. And yeah, he's just he's really fun to watch. When he's out there, it's Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, man. Buy in on those stocks.
Dude, he came into that Minnesota game, I think, and he looked really good. He was middle of the game, thrust out there in that Minnesota game, and he looked
Minnesota in the Seahawks game when Warner was out. I thought he was really impressive. He had one unfortunate play against the Bears that set us back a couple of months in the hype, but otherwise, I thought he had a great season.
That was a tough. I wasn't posting the McConaughey gif for a couple weeks after that. I remember that
it was unfortunate, but We recovered.
We came back stronger than ever. He's
Yeah, he made some nice special teams plays against the Bengals, and those stretched over into the playoffs.
He's another guy too where I'm looking at where, just like you said, they have 4 really good like linebackers, and unless maybe they see a guy they want to like develop and stash with like a late pick, I'm not. I don't think they need to take a linebacker in an off-ball linebacker. Hey, maybe they see a outside backer that can turn into a pass rusher. I'm not taking an off-ball linebacker in this draft if I'm the 49ers.
I messaged you about Troy Anderson. That's my guy if they were to take a linebacker, but I don't think it's a need. I think Flanagan Fowles is fine, and then they've got Greenlaw on roster, and then obviously the big two.
I think Troy Anderson. So it's really funny because you messaged me. I think about that at the combine, right?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. Yeah. So when I went to go talk and like hear him speak at his media availability, they had him off on the side at one of these like side tables, which is for the like lesser known prospects, not getting much hype. And I think he's going to end up being like a top 60, 70 pick. Like I think he's genuinely going to be like one of the top linemen. He tested insane. Like he looked so good on the field.
I'll leave. Like the last thing I want to say is just like, I wrote something about these FCS guys. There's so much talent in this class. I mean, like these guys are different, especially like we saw it with Lance once kind of paving the way, but these guys are insane. Watson, Penning is going to be good. Cole Strange is a guy who I would like the Niners to take if he was there. I talked about Wilson and Waletsko. Zion McCollum is there. Like there's so many guys that are just insane.
So real quick too, as we're heading out of here, Karan does writing specifically for draft stuff. If you're looking for draft stuff, he is your guy. Can you tell them where they can find your work? And I'm going to put the link in the description, and I'll post it on my Twitter too so you guys can see it. But where can they find their work, dude?
You can find me on the transfer portal, cfb.com. Follow me on Twitter, 905car. I like to talk about a variety of stuff, Niners, NFL draft. But yeah, I'm trying to branch out. I think I give good analysis when it comes to NFL draft and the Niners. So
you give great analysis. I'll say it for you. You give fantastic analysis. I'm serious, you guys. Like when I tell you this, there's a lot of people who I respect doing this stuff, but there's very few people who I will like stop what I'm doing to hear what they have to say. Or if I see them post a prospect on the timeline or all 22 film cut-ups, any of that stuff. Karan is one of the people that I can think of off the top of my head where I'm genuinely stopping what I'm doing to do that stuff. And I mean that wholeheartedly. So please, if you're looking for draft content, go check his stuff out on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter. Check out his work, his written work that he's doing too, because I genuinely mean that. I'm not just throwing around like false praise here. He genuinely is one of the few people where I'm like, okay, if he's talking about this player, I need to start doing my homework and brushing up on this guy. So for whatever that's worth, from my opinion, I would definitely recommend you guys do the same.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, we're blessed to have so many great Niners content creators these days. I mean, Jordan's had a massive growth over the last few months. Vish is out there. Brad, there's so many. Jason. There's a lot of guys that are just worth listening to at this point.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's get you out of here, dude, because it's been very generous for you to give us this much time. So I will be back in the next few days. I'm going to try to keep doing draft stuff. I might. Tomorrow I have to I have a commitment I have to go to. I'm attending a charity event, so I unfortunately can't do a stream tomorrow night, I think. Maybe Friday or Saturday this weekend, I'll do more mock draft stuff. I have a couple more draft-oriented streams planned that we'll work on. Jay, thanks for watching, dude. Have a good night. Appreciate you coming by. So I'm going to try to get back and do as much draft stuff as possible, and we'll get to it then. So thank you to everybody who watched. I hope you guys all have a good night, and then thank you again, Karan, for your time. I really appreciate it, dude.